Hi everyone, and welcome to a real-time coloring video of Jack the Elf. So this is the real-time coloring portion of the kind of video blog post about this then and now feature. Then and now feature is when I'm taking a old card and I remake it. For different reasons. It might be that I just want to update it for you with new products, or if I feel that I actually can make the card better and feel that I want to try. This is also a way for me to see how I evolve, and I love to share that with you because I think that is a good way for any art person is to try to look at things you did several years ago, and instead of feeling embarrassed over them, kind of figure out what have you changed, how have you changed, and how would you make it better. So yeah, that is the kind of idea behind these videos. So today I am doing Jack the Elf. The original I did back in 2014. I can note that if you want to see close-ups of both the old one and the new one, I have all the information on my blog. So there you can see kind of look at it and reflect and everything if you want to, or you may just want to see me color this character. So yeah, let's get back to it. Jack the Elf is a digital stamp by Make It Crafty. And he is this adorable little character, and he's a part of a series of stamps, and I really like him. I really love him, and I also love his friends. But I sort of never were really happy with how the face turned out, and I feel that from my point of view, I have become better at coloring faces, and therefore I wanted to update him properly. The big difference I think between old Jack and new Jack is how I treat cheeks, how I treat the area between the eyes, but also how I have treated his eyes. So I start off with my skin colors, and my darkest skin color, E04. This is where I outline kind of the darkest of the shadows. I usually try to go very lightly there, and if I feel it, I will feel that I need more, I will go back and have a second layer where I kind of deepen the darker areas. Then I'm going in with E11. And for the E11, I mainly just work by pulling out the shadows that I already have added, and maybe adding a new one in small places. Then I'm going in with the E21. This is kind of my mid-tone, so I'm trying to add it where I would add the mid-tone, but also I use it where I want a shadow, but I want it to be very soft. The next to last color is the E00. That is just blending out the E21. That is all it's gonna do, and I'm gonna blend it out until I only have the highlights left, the only places where I want the lightest of the color to be. I never leave white highlights on a face. I always have it colored in some way, shape and form. For the last color, right now it's the winter season, and then I usually use E000. So I'm very influenced on how my skin changes and how my skin looks when I'm using skin colors. I have been known to venture out of the box and try to color with other different skin colors that isn't like mine, and I do it sometimes, but very often I default back to the skin color of my own because I see it in the mirror every day, so I know how those colors kind of work, how they will reflect differently in different lights and such things. When working with other skin colors, I always have to look at references and figure things out, and it's not always very easy. For everything that is white on the face, like teeth and the whites of the eyes, I'm using the B60 series because it's a grayish blue with a little tint of purple in it, and it works perfectly for that. Also, when I did the eyes kind of have the pupil and the color around it, but it doesn't have the whites. So I added with a Copic liner the upper folds for the eyes. As he is a dude, I don't want to add too much kind of eyeshadow-ish or eyelashes, because that is something I think we all think about, is that when you add very defined lashes to something, that automatically in most of our heads gets a little bit female. And in this circumstance, I wanted him to look a little bit more male. However, you can color him however you want, and it would be awesome to see him a little bit more feminine, I think, because he do have feminine lines also. He's not the male. He's kind of soft and fluffy, kind of like soft and fluffy. But that's basically the face. I will be coming back to the eyes later on. The next step is the clothing, and with the clothing I'm actually going in and working with some greens. And I started off with the lightest of my greens just to kind of figure out where I want to put the shadows. Now this hat, it's not my friend. I have a hard time figuring out where to put the shadows and how to put the shadows and everything. But I kind of like how I ended up coloring him, so that's always good. I'm using a mixture of yellow greens and greens, and that is also a tip from a colorist, is that if you want to have more depth in your coloring, the normal kind of in the same color family triplets that a lot of stamping coloring is done, and often a way you buy your pens. It works to a certain degree, but you will not have the deepest shadows or the lightest kind of highlights, because the highlights and the shadows, they do not only get darker, but they also transfer in color. So for me now, when I'm doing this green, I have chosen the green 19, so the G19, as my darkest color. It is a little bit more blue, and shadows have a tendency to be a little bit more blue, so that kind of makes it look deeper, even though it has the same strength of any dark yellow green that I would do. So I do this because I like to have contrast, because I feel I get a little bit more pop in my images when I have contrast. However, there are some really good colorists out there that just have these super light and airy images. They don't really have that much contrast, but they're so beautiful. But I do contrast. I like contrast. I then take the YG17, which also is a YG with a little bit more blue in it, as my next darkest color. Then I'm going in with YG09. You could think that YG09 would be darker than the YG17, and technically it is, but because of the blue in the 17, the 09, when you work the 09 together with it, it actually looks a little bit lighter. And for my top color, I'm using YG07 and YG05. I was thinking of going directly to YG05, but found that I didn't get the blend that I wanted. So I went in with the YG07 in between to kind of get them to blend a little bit better. There are a lot of tips on how to, or tricks on how to get really good blends when you just have a few pencils or a few markers. You can do the tip to tip technique, where you use the light pen and then you pick up some dark pigment from a darker pen and then color. That will not destroy your pens, but it will give you kind of a gradient way to go from a light to a dark. This is kind of the idea behind the chameleon pens, if you have seen them. You basically will load up your pen with another color, and then while you are drawing, the original color will kind of take over in the end, so you will get a gradient. You can do that when you have markers by doing the tip to tip technique. However, I kind of like working on the paper with my pens, so I love having a whole bunch of pencils when I or markers when I work. I have a tendency to have between 3 and 5. I've been known to pick up 6 or 7 sometimes. It all depends. It depends where I'm going with it. I'm using my colorless marker to kind of remove the places where I have colored outside the lines, because yes, I do color outside the lines. I'm not an expert, and also that is also a thing. I color a lot more outside of the lines when I keep my card horizontal, as I'm doing here. I have taped down the piece, and the reason why I'm taping down the piece is because I feel that gives you a better consistency over how I put my ink down. And I have learned how to color this way, but I know that I sometimes get a better result if I just turn the paper and letting my natural kind of angle in my hand help me with the coloring. We all have different directions that we are better at having, being more certain with our lines. Some do it away from their body and some towards their body. And by moving your image around, you can utilize that. And if you're always doing it away from the body, you can kind of turn your image around and doing it away from the body, even going from the line and inwards. And that will give you a less walk going outside of the lines. But I do try to have the image stick down so that it's gonna be easier for you to see what I'm doing. Now I have gone from my greens. I chose to do most of his clothing in green, and then I'm adding natural grays for the different grays. And when it comes to the grays, Copic have 4 different grays. They have natural, they have toner, cold, and warm. Now I feel that they are different. I can see the difference between these, and I also can feel and see the difference in it together with other colors. So personally, from how I look at it, I feel that certain grays work better with some colors than others. However, the difference is very, very subtle, and you can get away with just having maybe 2 grays, having the cold and the warm grays. They are really different. The cold grays are very cold and white gray. I don't know how to explain it. While the warm grays are more towards like brownish tone. I think that's the big difference between them. But these are the neutrals. I think I would probably say that they are closer to the cold than the warm. I'm using the zeros, the 2s, the 4s, the 6th and 8th most often. Those kind of are my what I choose. They have the whole spectrum from 00 and then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But jumping 2 numbers seem to work really, really good for blending. And for I'm using the same neutral grays to kind of emulate a shadow on white clothing. So the stripes on his trousers and on his shirt, and also, or socks maybe is the stripes on. Anyhow, they are in grey, and I'm also going to go over with grey on the kind of main shirt in the middle to keep him a little bit simpler than the previous one I colored. I'm using the earth, the E40s for both the little thing he is holding, the brush, and his eyes. I really like this combination of brown in eyes. I have a lot of characters that get that color for the eyes because it is it's a very neutral color. It pops a lot because you get very dark eyes, but at the same time it's a very neutral color, so it doesn't overtake any of the clothing or other details in the card. Here I'm finishing it off by using my multi-liner, my Copic multi-liner. This is a 0.1, it's a black one. The fine thing with a Copic multi-liner is that if you change your mind after, if you are coloring a character and then you're adding the black and then you feel you need to color even more, you can still do that over the Copic multi-liner, while there are a whole bunch of other multi-liners that won't work with markers, so then you will kind of smudge everything and destroy everything if you need to color on top of it. But these are Copic safe, so you can do that. That's kind of awesome. I am doing a little bit with my colorless marker on all the grays to kind of give a little bit better highlights and to kind of make the lightest gray blend better into the white. I also added a little bit of pink on 2 of those little blushy circles so that it looks like he's blushing, or more he looks healthy. And the last colors are the reds. Now, when it comes to the reds, first of all, I usually leave it to the last when I do a coloring. And I leave it to the last because red is one of those colors that really wants to get picked up. So if you are using a lighter color of something completely different and your brush just gently brushes on the red on your paper, it will be picked up on the nib, and you usually don't find that out until you draw with that pen and you get a red streak on your paper. That's how it very often happens to me, and because it is a little volatile that way, the red colors, I usually try to put them as the last color on an image. I also hear a lot that red has a tendency to bleed. This is a very common idea. I don't have that issue, but I know why people say that. One of the things is that the red pigment is very potent, which means that the portion of pigment versus liquid is different in dark reds than in a dark green. In a dark green, because the green pigment isn't that potent, you need to have a lot of the pigment to make it that dark green. And the pen will automatically be a little bit drier because there isn't as much solvent in the pen. The lighter a color is, the more solvent you have in a pen, the wetter the ink will automatically be. This also leads to that lighter the pen you have, the harder it is to get very fine details because it is so liquidy. When it comes to red, red is an extremely potent pigment, which means it doesn't need as much pigment to create that really red color. So it will automatically be a lot juicier. So when you work with red pens, you have to be more careful because they will not go on as a similar dark pen in any other color. Now the second thing when it comes, and that means that when you are coloring with it also, you will oversaturate your paper much quicker. So there are a couple of tips. One is kind of wait in between colors, because then the alcohol, the solvent, have time to evaporate, and therefore you will not oversaturate your paper as much as you would if you would just continue to color. Also look into the paper you are using. Paper, for example, like Neenah, which I love to use when I do pencil art together with Copics. They have, the paper is not as dense as, for example, the paper I'm using here, which is the Make It color paper, and therefore it will not take as much liquid or pigment as this paper will. So it will start bleeding much quicker. So if you just try to work with a light hand, if you want to put a lot of layers of red down on the paper, you want to wait a little while in between colors to help them not be so wet. They will still blend okay. Colors blend easier when it is wet. However, if you wet it too much, the color will start to bleed. So those are the things. So those is kind of the theories behind red. I love coloring with red, and I really don't have the issue of bleeding for those reasons that I'm working on a very dense cardstock, which means that it's harder to oversaturate it. Also, when I work, I have a very, very light hand, so I don't put down that much ink at one time. I'm just using the very, very tip of the nib and just very lightly letting the nib go over the paper. Also, when I work close to the line, but very, very rarely going over the line. Knowing that colors can bleed a little bit, I give them a little space to bleed so they don't bleed outside my line, but bleed inside the line, sort of. I hope you understood that. I hope I'm making myself understood, because yeah, words sometimes. Anyhow, those are my tips about coloring red. I love coloring red, and you shouldn't stop coloring red because you're afraid of bleeding. There are so many things you can do to avoid bleeding. And if you look here, I am actually doing the reds on his arms, on those little details, and I'm still using all of those pens. I haven't reduced the color palette. I'm still using, like, I have 4 different colors when I do red because I want to have these details. So I'm starting off with a really, really dark, almost blue red, and that one is actually pretty dry as a pen, and I'm using that to do for the deepest. Then I'm going in with a 46. Again, because of the number being a 4, it goes towards the kind of grayer tones and isn't as bright red, but it's still a pretty good red. Then I'm using the 27, and this is to get this red to become more of a Christmas red. Really, I want it to be Christmas red. The 27 is perfect for that. And the 24 is my highlight, because this is actually one of the few light red that still is red. Most light reds have a tendency to be pink. This one isn't. And this is why I use it as my highlights. I'm not doing it to be very, very light. I'm just doing it to look like it's very, very red. Very, very Christmas red. But yeah, as you see, I'm using all of those colors and it's still not bleeding. And you can get it to work, I promise you. So that was the coloring for today. I hope you liked it and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please thumbs it up, comment down below, subscribe, share it with your friends, anything, and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I see you later. Bye!